Jeannie or Dana or Dina, can one of you assist Patsy, please? Patsy, just hang tight. There'll be some response in the chat. Hi everybody, this is Corey Hill. I work at the Partnership for People with Disabilities at Virginia Commonwealth University. I want to welcome you to our September Talks on Tuesday, Getting From Here to There. We're going to be exploring navigating the transition from Part C to Part B. We are delighted to have Phyllis Mondek from Part B and Sarah Moore and Kyla Patterson from Part C. As a reminder, and we'll remind you at the end that this is part one of a two-part series about transition. So our next Talks on Tuesday in October is going to be a web discussion about transition. So thank you for joining us, and I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Kyla Patterson. Thanks, Kyla.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today to talk about navigating the transition from Part C, Early Intervention, to Part B, Early Childhood Special Education. As Corey mentioned, this is part one of a two-part Talks on Tuesdays webinar series on this topic. Today's webinar is going to focus on the regulations and requirements on both the Part C and Part B ends of the transition process, where those requirements overlap between the two systems, and what are the sort of the non-negotiable versus negotiable aspects of transition. And that discussion about non-negotiables, what's required, and negotiables, what can be worked out at the local level, will lead us nicely into part two of the series, which will happen in October and focus on effective communication and collaboration at the local level around transition. So early intervention and early childhood special education, you can sort of think of them as being along a path or a continuum that a family might travel along while supporting their child. And today we're going to talk about supporting families as they transition from the early intervention system portion of that path to the early childhood special education system. To get us started, we do want to sort of see who's on the phone with us today. So we're going to start with a quick poll asking which program you're affiliated with. And just as a reminder, you can answer that poll by looking in the left side of your screen under the participants, under your name, the box with the lowercase a. If you hover your mouse there and click, you'll be able to select A, B, or C. I'll give you a minute to do that now. Okay, it looks like most people have responded. I think we can go ahead and publish those results. Okay, yeah, and it looks like between that and the information in chat and some great smiley faces on our screen that most of the folks here are associated with early intervention, but we're super happy that we've got a few folks who represent the early childhood special education end of the transition process and some who have a role in both systems. So again, thank you all for joining us today. Oh, sorry, I'm having a small technical glitch. There we go. Okay, so as we start talking about the regulations and requirements on the Part C end of transition, I think it's important that we start just with eligibility, with the basics, right? So early intervention is also referred to as Part C because it's governed by Part C of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And Part C says that children can be eligible for early intervention from birth to age 3. They also need to be eligible based on meeting an eligibility criteria. And we have three kind of broad categories of eligibility criteria. A child could be found eligible for Part C early intervention based on the presence of a developmental delay, which we define as a 25% delay in one or more areas of development. They also could be eligible, or instead could be eligible because of atypical development. And that's even in the absence of a developmental delay. And we think about atypical development in a few different areas in terms of sensory motor responses, social, emotional, behavioral, or perhaps a combination of impairment in social and communication development with restrictive and repetitive behaviors. And then the third category of eligibility would be when a child has a diagnosed condition that has a high probability of resulting in developmental delay, even if that child is not yet showing a delay. And we know from the Part C side, we have a fairly long list of conditions in that category, and some of those, like chromosomal abnormalities, are even categories within themselves with a number of specific conditions that would fall within that. One of the reasons I think it's important that we do revisit and talk about eligibility is as you go along today, we will see there are differences in what makes a child eligible under Part C for early intervention compared with what makes a child eligible under Part B for early childhood special education. It's important to understand those differences. Okay. So somebody said the slides don't appear to be advancing. Can somebody confirm for me that they can see cupcakes on the screen at this point? So we make sure we're not.
Yes, Kyla.
Thank you very much. So although children are eligible for early intervention under Part C until their 3rd birthday, Virginia Code actually allows that children who turn 2 by September 30th and meet Part B eligibility requirements are eligible to receive early childhood special education services in Virginia. So it's important to know that referral from early intervention, transition from early intervention can happen at either of those times, as a child is turning 2 by September 30th or as a child is turning 3. So if a child is potentially eligible for Part B, service coordinators are going to be talking with families at those points. First, as a child is turning 2 by September 30th, to see what they would like to do in terms of transition. And if a parent declines a referral to Part B, as their child is turning 2 by September 30th, then that's going to be documented, and the service coordinator would revisit that discussion with the family as the child approaches his or her 3rd birthday. And before we go forward, let me just take a minute here to explain what I mean when I say a child is potentially eligible for Part B, because you're going to hear that phrase again. We define potentially eligible for Part B as any child who's expected to still need services as they exit early intervention. So that's a pretty broad definition. All of those children are not going to end up being eligible for Part B, but those are the children who are potentially eligible. And the child's ISSP team determines whether the child is potentially eligible for Part B. Okay, so another activity for you here. We're interested in which of the required Part C transition activities you have participated in, either previously or now you participate in them. And this is where our drawing tool is going to come into play for those of you who were here for the orientation. And for everyone else, if you'll remember, to the left side of your screen you have a vertical toolbar. The 3rd box down is a crayon-looking tool. If you'll click there, then you can click on your screen in the circle and make a check mark just by holding down your mouse and make a check mark. Yep, some folks are getting that done. So put a check mark in the box or the circle of those transition activities that you participate in. Okay, a lot of check marks, and without individually trying to count check marks, it looks to me like roughly the same number in each of those circles. So folks who participate in one transition activity probably participate in each of these transition activities in the Part C system. Okay, thank you. Let's talk about each of those transition-related requirements. And there are basically 3 big transition-related requirements under Part C that local early intervention systems need to address. And the first is the transition plan. The transition plan really documents the individualized steps and supports that will be provided to an individual child and family to prepare for transition. And a transition plan needs to be developed for all children exiting early intervention, including those potentially eligible for Part B, but also those who are exiting to community-based programs or potentially even exiting to no further services. The transition plan is actually part of the child's IFSP, and it's developed either at an initial or annual IFSP or at an IFSP review. As we talk about these transition requirements on both the Part C and the Part B end, you'll see there's a timeline associated with each of those steps. And in the case of the transition plan, it must be developed at least 90 days and up to 9 months before the anticipated transition date. The second transition requirement under Part C is notification. Local early intervention systems are required to send the child's name, birth date, and parent contact information to the local school division and the Virginia Department of Education for every child who's potentially eligible for Part B, unless the parent opts out. And the way that works is that the transition plan that we just talked about, that's in the IFSP, is going to identify when that notification information will be sent. And the parent has the ability to opt out right on the IFSP, right in that transition plan. Otherwise, as long as the parent allows the information to be sent, the IFSP transition plan will then have a place where you would fill in the date that that notification was actually sent. Okay. I'll comment here, it's really important to know that notification is the same as referral. Notification is the term that's used in the federal regulations, but they have made clear that by that they mean referral. And receipt of the notification by the local school division constitutes a referral for an evaluation under Part B. Okay. Talking about timelines again, the notification and referral have to happen at least 90 days before the child's anticipated date of transition. But I want to say just a little bit more about that. That's the federally required timeline, that notification has to be sent at least 90 days before transition. But we know, as I mentioned before, that there are timelines for each of the steps that happen after a child gets referred to the local school division, right? They have certain amounts of time to get each of their required steps completed. And we need to make sure that that notification or referral is happening far enough ahead that Part B has time to get their steps done and that child's ready to start school in a timely manner. So we have a state interagency agreement between the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services, the state lead agency for Part C in Virginia, and the Virginia Department of Education that further specifies the timelines to ensure that that notification or referral do happen early enough for the school system to complete their steps within their timelines and allow the child to start school on time. So under that agreement, unless otherwise agreed to locally, the notification or referral must be made no later than April 1st in a given year if the child will be 2 by September 30th, or at least 6 months prior to the child's 3rd birthday if the child's going to transition at age 3. So as I mentioned, those are the timelines agreed to at the state level, but you may have other timelines agreed to at the local level and recorded in a local interagency agreement, as long as those timelines locally allow that child, ensure that child can start school on time. The third transition requirement under Part C is the transition conference. A transition conference is required with parent approval for all children potentially eligible for Part B. And that conference, again, needs to be held at least 90 days or up to 9 months before the anticipated transition date. And it must meet the requirements of an IFSP meeting. And that's kind of why the service coordinator is sort of in charge of pulling that transition conference together, because we need to make sure that the family is receiving prior notice, just like with any other IFSP meeting, that there's a written confirmation of the meeting that goes to all participants, that the meeting is accessible to the family can invite other people who are a support to them, whether it's an advocate or another family member, and so on. The purpose of a transition conference is to discuss the services the child might receive through the public schools, as well as kind of the potential service delivery options within that local school division. I'll also note that that transition conference can occur before or after the notification and referral. We might often think that it makes sense ahead of time because it is helping the family to understand more about what's available in the school system. It might help them make a decision about whether they want notification and referral to happen, but there is no requirement that those two have to happen in any particular order. In terms of who needs to participate in that transition conference, it needs to include a Part C representative, a Part B representative, and the family. The Part B representative doesn't have to be any specific position or person within the local school system. It just needs to be a person from the school system who's knowledgeable about the services available, somebody who can provide information and answer questions about the continuum of supports and services available through that local school system. Certainly a face-to-face meeting is preferred for that transition conference, but if, for instance, that Part B person wasn't able to participate in person, they could participate through a teleconference or a video conference, just like we do with other participants in an IFSP meeting. And in that rare instance when none of those options for participating works and the Part B person is not able to participate at all, the transition conference would still go on. Part C will provide the parents with information about services in general available through the school system. And then the local school division needs to provide the family with a contact name and phone number where the family can call with questions about school services if they want additional information. Okay, so that's kind of a quick overview of the transition regulations and requirements on the Part C end of transition. Before we move on to talking about the Part B requirements, does anybody have questions? We might have time to answer a couple of questions. You can type those in the chat if you have a question. All right, so Arlington is asking if we have given the family a parental prior notice that states the transition conference is required at the transition planning meeting. Do we need to give another one at the conference? I'm confused about the conference needing to meet IFSP review requirements. Okay, that raises a couple of issues. Let me see if I could address them. So one is that you could combine the meeting to develop the transition plan with the transition conference. So you could do those together if you wanted to, in which case you'd give one parental prior notice saying both of those things are happening in this IFSP meeting, right? Or they could happen separately. And so if you're at a meeting and you're developing the transition plan and you're talking to the family about the fact that there needs to be a transition conference coming up, you could provide them with the parental prior notice at that point for the upcoming transition conference. And if I didn't quite answer your question, Arlington, please feel free to type a follow-up and we'll try to get back to that. Marty is asking for clarification. Referral can be made before actual transition planning conference. So yes, it could happen in that order. You could make a notification and have the transition conference after that. All right, we have a number of other questions coming in, but I am also sensitive to making sure we get through the content. So Corey is going to help us keep track of the questions that I did not get to, and we will hopefully have time for some more questions at the end. So feel free to keep typing in your questions, and we will get to those. At this point, though, I'm going to turn it over to Phyllis to talk to us about Part B.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to talk about when we serve the children and how we get them into the services in Part B. As we said before, services begin when the child is age eligible. They are 2 by the end of September or by their 3rd birthday. The first part of the process, we talk about the receipt of notification. As Kyla had said before, that notification and referral are the same thing in Virginia. The process for preschoolers follows the same process as school-age children. The designated person receives the referral by phone or in person, by fax, by email. Make sure that you know who that designated person is who receives that information. That starts your 65 days when that's received. From that point on, Part B can have a child study team to decide whether to go forward with the referral or not, whether they need additional information besides what they've received from Part C, to decide what other things that they need, or if they're going to do a screening, whatever the process is they want to do from that point on is within that 65 days. The referrals come no matter what time of year it is. As we said, it happens all year long. So it doesn't matter if the staff is 10 months, 11 months, 12 months, if someone's on vacation for a period of time, there's got to be a designated person who's accepting those referrals and starting the 65 days. The 65-day timeline is a workday timeline, not a calendar day timeline like it is in Part C, so there's one of the big differences when it comes to the timeline. The other thing to remember is that it's based on a state and federal government calendar. So if the school system has gone down to a 4-day work week, it still counts as 5 days for your 65 days because the state government and everybody is working for 5 days. Unfortunately, in Virginia, inclement weather also eats up some of your time because of the way the state regulations are done. Late referrals from Part C are late referrals from Part C because that's what the family has chosen. Part C cannot make the families decide that they have to send the referral by April 1st. They can't make the family decide to send the referral 65 days before the 3rd birthday. Families decide at the last minute. Things change at the last minute. So when you make your referral, Part C, make sure it's documented that this is when the family wanted. Part B, look on the IFSP to make sure that when you got it and when the family signed is close together. That starts your 65 days, and then you still have 65 days in Part B to do the evaluation. So if a child is referred in the middle of July, you have 65 work days, which is Monday through Friday, to get it done. Hopefully you can get it done by the beginning of school if you start in September. That's not always possible, but you need to use some common sense and look at what's available and where things are with the family and within your school division. Eligibility determination. Let's talk about the teams that are at this meeting first. Eligibility and IEP teams are the same. The team members that must be in attendance, we will talk about on the next slide. And it can include the children if you want them out there for people to be able to see the child and see how functional they are. Remember, when you're talking about eligibility for preschoolers, you want to see that they are functional and they are able to do the tasks that you expect of a child of that age. That is their work. That is their educational need. You're making sure that the child is eligible under one of 13 categories, which are listed in Part B, and we're not going to go over those today. But you're also making sure that there's educational need for the child. So they may be looking pretty good on paper, but when you look at that child functionally and how they are in the preschool in their home, they may be very atypical, not functional at all, and you may find that child eligible under a developmental delay versus a specific other category. If the parent wants Part C to attend the eligibility and the IEP meetings, they need to give permission. And then you decide with the parent who's going to invite Part C. Have a consistent process for this. Make sure that the parents are asked, number one, do you want Part C, and do you want to invite them or do you want us to invite them? It should be noted on your parent notification for the eligibility meeting, and just to make sure you should be sending information to Part C on what things are going through in the process so they have an idea of the timelines and what information you're looking for. The child must meet one of the eligibility criteria and need special education services, I said before. They can have a diagnosed condition that will lead to services in the future, and the two that pop up the most are children with Down syndrome and children with a hearing impairment that's aided, and they seem to be doing very well with their language. However, we know that between age 2 and 3, especially children with Down syndrome, there can be a big decline in their language skills. You would find them eligible, but not necessarily give them a large amount of services. You could follow them. You could go in on a screening every 6 weeks, some way that you're going to follow the child, but not necessarily have to give them services, because you don't want that child showing up at your doorstep in kindergarten having received nothing because you didn't find them eligible under a diagnosed condition that will lead to problems in the future, and Part C dismissed them because they can no longer serve them after age 3, and this child has just been floundering out there for 2 or 3 years. You want to make sure that everybody's got the support they need. Okay. So if you have participated in an eligibility meeting or some part of this process, take your drawing tool and put a little mark somewhere on the page, please. We've got a couple hearts. How nice. I'm glad people are glad about it. Okay, very nice. It looks like a lot of people have participated. That's good to see. Okay, eligibility team members. These are the people that have to be at an eligibility and IEP meeting. We're going to start with the presumption that the child will be served in the least restrictive environment, a place with a general ed setting, should always be first consideration. So we want to make sure that we have a general education teacher at all of these meetings, in addition to the parents, a special ed teacher, an educational administrator from the school division. Your general ed teacher can be the teacher that the child is seeing at the time from a community setting, a general education teacher from the school division who has pre-K certification, or a second early childhood education teacher, special education teacher. ECSE teachers are licensed to teach children from birth to 6, so you can have 2 ECSE teachers. One ECSE teacher cannot be both the general ed teacher and the special ed teacher in this meeting. You need to have 2 separate people so that you are looking from different lenses. You need other individuals who can interpret the evaluation results, such as if you have outside motor evaluations or an outside speech evaluation, somebody in the school division who can interpret those reports. And then other individuals that are invited by the parent or the LEAs, such as doctors or private therapists, anybody that is going to bring pertinent information. The other thing to remember about an eligibility meeting is that you are just finding the child eligible for services under one of the disability labels. It does not ask you to do anything else but that. So from there, if the child is found eligible, you move on to your IEP development. Again, same team makeup. You've got your gen ed, your special ed, your specialist, the parents, Part C, your administrator. You should always start with least restrictive environment. You want to strive to leave the child in the typical environment they are presently participating in. You want to help support the child to stay there, to be successful there. You want to get the family and teachers and other people involved in that support so the child is successful and functional in all these different settings. You may also use Part C information for your IEP development. That you can use the Part C information for your Indicator 7, which is our growth over time. So exit from Part C, entrance in Part B should be the same information. You can trade it back and forth, which will also keep down some of that evaluation and invasion to the family of all the questions and the things that we ask them and the child to do. Remember that the IEP needs to be written in 30 calendar days from the eligibility meeting. That does not mean the IEP has to be implemented within those 30 days. The family may choose to be referred to Part B, go through the process, say yes, they're eligible, and then say, but I really want to wait to start until their 3rd birthday, and that's 3 months away. You can do that. The start date for the IEP would be on the 3rd birthday. The same thing happens for the children who were referred by April 1st. You may be done with the eligibility and the IEP development by the middle of May because you've got lots of information to start with. You didn't need to take a lot of time to evaluate. And the family says, okay, it's done. The child is not age eligible until the beginning of the next school year. So now you start your IEP implementation for September 6th or August 28th, whatever your first day of school is. It is okay to write the IEP to have part of it be an updating of where the child's levels are when they enter at that point in time. You may get all the way through the process and the family decides we're not quite ready to transition. They signed the eligibility, they agree, you write the IEP, or they decide they don't want an IEP, they sign that as the eligibility, we don't want any services, we don't want to do anything at this point. Family comes back, beginning of the school year. You do not have to go through the eligibility process again. The child has already been found eligible. And unless there has been a lot of time and a lot of change with the child, eligibility still stands, and you can now go and write your IEP and implement from there. Okay. I want you to now make a check on the page with your drawing tool if you've participated in one of the IEP team meetings or the development of an IEP. Okay, good. Lots of participation in this. The more information you can have for the family and the child, the better your IEP is going to be. The school division provides services when the child is age eligible, as I said before. So if they're not eligible until the beginning of the next school year and you find the child eligible in April or May, you are not obligated to start services at that point. On the flip side, if you find the child who is turning 3, but not yet over the summer or the next September, and they were referred, and you find them eligible in March, the beginning of April, you are obligated to start services at that point. There's enough time until the end of the school year to be able to get services started, get the child into the routine, and see what's going on. You may find them eligible for summer services at that point. You've got enough information to decide if they need that. You know, that's when you want to start. But think about it for the child who you're finding eligible towards the very end of the school year, middle of May, beginning of June. The child is going to go through, and the family, lots of transitions. If you end Part C, start Part B, you don't have enough information to decide if summer services are warranted. So they stop services, and then 2 months later they start services again. You've now put the child through 4 different transitions. So just keep in mind common sense about where things are in the calendar, in the child's life, in the family's life, when you're doing your eligibility and your IEP implementation. When we talk about the IEP being implemented in a reasonable amount of time after the IEP is signed, your reasonable amount of time is based on the individual needs for the family and the school system and the child. Do you need to set up transportation? Does the school division need to find a nurse? Do they need to make sure that they've got a lift bus coming to the house? Is something going on with the family that they've changed their mind and they want to wait until after they go visit the grandparents who have gotten ill? Those types of things factor into a reasonable amount of time. Keep in mind that people want to make sure that services start as soon as possible. Okay. So at this point, if there are any questions about what I've talked about, go ahead and write them in the chat, and we will see what we can do.
Phyllis, I'm going to go ahead. This is Corey. I'm going to go ahead and throw out a couple questions.
Okay.
Again, for all of you, I am recording in chat, so I'll catch your questions if we don't get to them. Arlington ITC Phyllis wants to know who defines referral and receipt of referral, the date of the referral, the date the family can provide the documentation needed to proceed with the student study meeting.
The date the 65 days starts is when the school division receives the information. It can be a phone call from the family. It can be a phone call from Part C. Paper information, such as the latest IFST or the latest IFST review, whatever they've got, that needs to be given to the school system as soon as possible, so it could all be faxed over and that be the start. But it's just like with school-age children. The law states that anybody who says they suspect this is a child with a disability and talks to the special ed director or the person who's coordinating the referral team, that starts your 65 days. The same thing happens with Part C to B, that when they talk to the school division. Now, if they talk to the school division and then it takes a long time to get the information to Part B, you all are kind of shooting yourselves in the foot for your transition information for your performance report. So think about that. That's one of the reasons I tell Part B people to make sure you look at the IFSP, to look at the dates that are on that to make sure that the dates you receive the information and the dates the family said do it are all close by, so that the 65-day and the referral information is going to give everybody the best advantage they can for getting all the evaluations done.
Okay, Phyllis, you actually have quite a few questions, but in trying to honor our 1 o'clock time, I am going to keep us moving forward. Central Virginia, Chesapeake, CDR, Elizabeth, IPC of Norfolk, Donna Baldwin, I have noted your questions if we have time at the end. If not, we will get responses. So Phyllis, I'm going to turn it back to you if it's time to move to Sarah.
Yes, it is. In summary of what's gone on so far, Kyla reviewed Part C regulations, process, and timelines for the transition meetings and referring to Part B. The process eligibility criteria, if you all look at, were quite different. They're a little more narrowed and in need of educational support in Part B. Part C is a little broader and looking at the family needs and the support the child needs in their environment a little more general or broader. Part B regulations and processes for eligibility, IEP development, and implementation were gone over. The biggest thing to remember is that Virginia is very unique in the fact that we are the only state that will take children starting at age 2 at the beginning of the year for Part B services. And that the families have that choice during that year of what they would like to do before the child's 3rd birthday. Okay, now Sarah will do some comparison activities and talk about negotiables and non-negotiables in the process.
Good morning. We've reviewed the steps of the Part C transition process and what's involved with Part B. Now let's take a look at where these two programs overlap. Notification, Transition Conference, Eligibility Determination, and IEP Development overlap both programs. Notification is sent from Part C and received as a referral by Part B. Part C and Part B participate together with the family in the Transition Conference. Assessment information from Part C can be used in eligibility determination. The IFSP may be used in developing the IEP, and parents may invite Part C to eligibility determination and initial IEP development meetings. Now we're going to look at each of these overlapping factors and talk about what is non-negotiable and what is negotiable. Non-negotiable means there is no leeway in how it's done. Negotiable means there is room for negotiation. Please take a look at these statements on your slide, and using the crayon feature, make a check mark for each statement as to whether you think it is non-negotiable or negotiable.
Sarah?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure you're still there.
No, I was giving everybody time to complete their answers.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Take a
minute and try to remember where you put your check marks for each of these items. And now let's review. The notification is the referral. That is non-negotiable. What is negotiable? The notification may include the service coordinator's name and contact information and the language spoken by the child and family. What's non-negotiable? Notification or referral is required if the child is potentially eligible for Part B unless the parent opts out. What is negotiable is the person in the Part C program who sends the notification and the person in the Part B program who receives the notification and referral. My apologies. I'm going to my pointer and I hit something else. Okay. The notification and the referral must include the child's name, date of birth, and parent contact information. What is negotiable is how that information will be sent to Part B, whether it is mailed, whether it is faxed, sent in the pony, or hand-delivered. Non-negotiable, the 65-day timeline begins when the notification is received by Part B. What's also non-negotiable is that staff vacations, staff work schedules, and breaks such as summer vacation cannot delay the receipt of the referral. Take a minute and type in chat if there were any surprises in what you thought was non-negotiable or negotiable. Anybody surprised by anything? I noted we had a lot of check marks under the name of the service coordinator being a non-negotiable, but that one actually is a negotiable. And someone says that they were surprised that noting the child's language was negotiable. All right, let's move now to our next overlapping component, which is the transition conference. And I'd like for you to do the same thing using your check mark tools. And if I'm quiet for a while, you haven't lost me. I've given you time to respond. Okay, I'm seeing lots of check marks. All right, take a moment and remember where you put your check mark for each of these items. Okay, now let's review these. What's non-negotiable? The transition conference must be at least 90 days and can be up to 9 months before the child's anticipated date of transition. What is negotiable is who participates for Part B. Part B may send any staff that are familiar with their early childhood special education programs and can explain these programs to the family. What's non-negotiable? That the transition is required with parental approval for all children potentially eligible for Part B. What is negotiable is Part B's method of participation. While a face-to-face meeting is preferred, participation by teleconference or video conference is acceptable. And what's non-negotiable is that the transition conference must include a Part C representative, a local education agency representative, and the family. And we have said that if the local education agency is not able to attend, then they must provide a name and contact information to Part C to give to the family. So they must be represented either face-to-face, video conference, or teleconference, or with a name and contact information that the family can follow up. All right, now let's move to eligibility determination. And please do the same thing with your check mark. Okay, we'll give you about 10 more seconds. Okay, take a minute to remember where you put your check mark. And let's move to our negotiables and non-negotiables. Membership at an eligibility meeting includes the special education teacher, the general education teacher, a representative who can interpret the evaluation results, and an LEA representative, an administrative representative of the local education agency. Parents must be invited. You need to attempt to schedule this meeting at a time the parents can attend and make every effort to do so. And if you cannot hold the meeting at a time the parents can attend, you need to look for alternative methods of participation, once again, like video conferencing or teleconferencing. And if the meeting is held without the parents able to attend, you need to document your effort to hold the meeting when they could attend. What is negotiable is whether or not Part C is invited to the meeting. What's non-negotiable are the 65 business days to determine eligibility. What is negotiable is whether or not the child meets the requirements of a child with a disability in one of the 13 categories used by the Part B program. They must demonstrate significant impairment in participation in age-appropriate activities and require special education services. Part C eligibility criteria is different from Part B's, and being eligible for Part C does not automatically determine eligibility for Part B. And I noticed we had check marks in both categories for this one. If a child is referred to Part C between 45 and 90 days prior to being eligible to receive services from Part B, with parental permission, Part B and Part C may conduct the eligibility evaluations together. Now let's move to our final checkbox slide, which is IEP development. Okay, take a minute. Remember where you put your check. What's non-negotiable? The membership at the IEP meeting. We said the IEP team and the eligibility determination team are the same. And once again, parents must be invited and the meeting needs to be scheduled at a mutually agreed upon time. If parents are unable to attend, they must give permission before an IEP can be implemented or changed. What's negotiable? Part C may be invited to the meeting. What's non-negotiable? IEP must be written within 30 calendar days from the eligibility meeting. But as Phyllis talked about in great detail earlier, the start date of that the start date of that IEP can be flexible. For example, it might be written in June, but it's going to start on the first day of school. So what determines the non-negotiables and the negotiables? The non-negotiables are defined by federal and state regulations and what's already been negotiated at the state level. Negotiated state-level agreements between early intervention and the Department of Education are documented in the State Interagency Agreement. A copy of the State Interagency Agreement is included in your handout. So what about the negotiables, the local level decisions? Decisions regarding areas of flexibility determined at the local level should be documented in your Infant and Toddler Connections Local Interagency Agreement. The Considerations in Collaboration handout included in today's presentation lists topics to consider for local determinations. Open communication between Part C and Part B programs helps ensure a successful navigation of the transition process. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Kyla.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Unfortunately, we are not going to have time to get back to all of our questions today, so I want you to know that all of the questions asked today, including those we did not get to, will be included in a written question and answer document that we're developing jointly with the Department of Education. It will include questions from today's webinar, questions that might come up in October in Part 2 of this series, and the questions that were asked during an in-person transition session that we did jointly with the early childhood special education leaders in August. So there will be a complete package of questions and answers. In addition, some of the questions you asked today we'll put forward and attempt to answer in Part 2 of our webinar, because some of them were related to local kinds of issues. I just wanted to point out, in addition to the resources that we sent out ahead of today's meeting, this slide includes links primarily to regulatory and requirement kinds of documents that may be of interest to you. And then finally, just again, a reminder, we really hope that you'll join us again for Part 2 of this webinar series. The October 4th Talks on Tuesday will feature a web discussion that will be facilitated by a local Part C and a local Part B representative. And the content will include building an effective working relationship to ensure smooth transition for children and families. So that brings us to the end of the content. Corey, I'll turn it back over to you for any wrap-up.
Thank you, Kyla. Thank you to all three of you for providing such great information. Again, just to reiterate what Kyla just said, if you registered for this September Talks on Tuesday, you are automatically registered for the October 4th, and you will receive the login information via email, just like you did today. Jeannie has typed a couple of the links in chat. We are capturing your chat questions. If you have any more, we will leave the chat open for another minute or two. And I hope everybody has a nice afternoon. Thank you.